so that, you know, I can be an influencer. I can be preaching to people about PSS1321. It's kind of strange. My daughter, who's up in Idaho going to school, occasionally when I leave myself in public mode, she'll hop on and watch me for a while, which, you know, it's kind of creepy, but, you know, she has family, so, you know, we're okay with that. Let's see. Boy, this is really dragging today. I'm only at about 12 megabytes out of 17 megabytes loaded here, so I may have to go into my finger puppets here. Look, it's a dog. It's a talking dog. We're at 14. We're at 15. Everyone pull up ahaslides.com and do ahaslides.com/LEC12. I think that's what it is. I will actually have it up on the screen in just a moment here, and we'll be able to tell for certain. I think it's /LEC12. Yes, it is LEC12. So either try the QR code or go to ahaslides.com/LEC12. Is this screen kind of blurry today, or is it always like this? All right. Anyone still need time getting there? All right. Let's give it a shot. So today we're going to talk about tillage and crop establishment. And so I thought it would be interesting to get your thoughts, assuming this ever loads, on something other than that. All right. What things do you need to do to prepare for planting? So think of going out and planting a crop out in the field. Let's get some ideas on what would be useful to do in preparation for planting. Fertilize, tillage, tilling, O2, Qatar, research, oxygen, fertilize, tilling, fertilize soil, environment conditions. Ooh, this is fun. I wonder if it'll allow me to give more time on it. Apparently it doesn't. You better hurry. You better hurry. All right. Hey, that was fun. Great job, everyone. What did you put? Yeah, now I've got to look and see the will to plant. I like that. I like that. Yeah. How many of you noticed that I set it up so that you can't put swear words? Yeah. All right. There's probably something up here that I don't want to be seeing, but I'm going to leave that off for the moment. All right. So today we're going to be talking about how to plant a seed, how to grow a seed, and what goes into the prep for planting a seed. It's a multi-step process, and it's going to look different depending on whether you're doing conservation tillage or conventional tillage. We'll talk a little bit about commercial seed practices. We'll talk about federal laws, certification, planting depth, seeding rates, and just kind of go through that, and we'll see how far we get. First of all, you've got to prep your land before you plant. If you just go out and throw your seeds out there on the surface of the ground, they're not actually going to do very well, which brings up the question, how do most wild plants reproduce? Well, they get blown around, they land on the surface of the soil, and then they grow and they're happy. So why is it that we say that we've got to put our crop plants in the soil, but it seems like we can get away with wild plants with not putting them in the soil? Any ideas? Why can you just take wild plants and let them, pollinate and go to seed, and they seem to grow just fine, but with crops that we're trying to make a profit off of, we say you've got to put them, an inch deep in the soil or else they're going to die. And there are a few reasons for this. I'll throw out a few of them. This is not exhaustive by any means, but for one thing, if you've got a plant out in the wild and it's just producing a bunch of seeds that are going every which way, that plant is not anticipating or expecting that all of those seeds are going to germinate. Whereas if we're in a production system, we need to be having a large fraction of our seeds germinate, or we're not going to get a very good crop. And so the expectations are different. A lot of our weed seeds in particular, but wild plant seeds as a whole, tend to be a lot more resilient to difficult environments. If you look, and this is going back to Dr. Patel talked about this early in the semester, we've had thousands and thousands of years over which we've domesticated crop seeds to meet the needs that we have. And we, in that process, have selected for seeds over time that grow really well if they are given great conditions, and they don't do nearly as well when they're not given really good conditions. So a lot of the things that we do to help them out are we till in order to make our residue manageable. If you're planting into corn stalks, and if you're running a planter through there, a lot of times the corn stalks will not let the planter get into the ground. You end up with seeds left on the top of the surface. Tillage can help with some of your pests. It can help to incorporate manures, fertilizers, lime, which is used for pH control. It can get the seed bed ready to go, and it can alter the soil conditions. So traditionally, we have used something called conventional tillage. And conventional tillage, if you look at the establishment of settlers in the Midwest and the West, much of that came through farming, and much of that came through the development of a type of tillage called the moldboard plow. It made it possible to do relatively large acreages of land relatively simply. Now, when I say relatively large acreages, you could pull a moldboard plow behind a mule or behind an ox. And so it made it possible with relatively, or a horse, with relatively small quantities of labor, you could suddenly go from doing maybe 1/4 of an acre, maybe, to doing 3 or 4 acres in a year. I don't know if this is true, but I'll tell you it anyway, because, I've never stopped knowing whether something's true from repeating it. But supposedly, in West Texas, if you look at the cotton that we plant, cotton is almost always on 40-inch rows, which 40 inches is just a little bit more than a meter. It's like 1.02 meters. So it's about as close as you can get to a meter wide as you can get with the English unit system. So you would think maybe we were just trying to shoot for a meter wide, because Texas likes to get all metric and go, the centimeters thing. But what I was told was that was the width of a plow mule. So when you're going through the field, 40 inches is the width of your mule, and you can kind of gauge according to it. Again, I think that's probably a little bit of a tall tale, but I tried to test it out. I tried to measure the width of a mule, and those things kick. You got to watch out for them. But the moldboard plow, it shears the soil and it flips it over. And when it goes through, it removes most of the residue in the soil. And then, so this picture right here is a picture of a moldboard plow. Here's a diagram of one here, but it's just this big plowshare, and it's on an angle, and it just flips the soil over and makes a nice ribbon and turns it over in the field. And then usually, if you're doing the moldboard plow, it does a great job of turning the soil, but you've got to break the soil back down to where you don't have big chunks of it before you plant anything. So usually it's a two-step process. The moldboard plow and other major tillage that really pulls the soil up is called primary tillage. And then usually you're going to follow it with some type of a secondary tillage, such as a harrow or a disc, which is going to smooth the soil, break it down into small chunks, and you can plant directly into it at that point. Before this class, how many of you, when asked a question, would feel pretty comfortable that you knew the difference between primary and secondary tillage? Okay, how many of you felt like you probably didn't care? Okay, fair enough. But that's the main difference. So anytime you see someone talking about primary tillage and secondary tillage, primary is the heavy duty tillage. Secondary is flattening it out and getting it ready for planting usually, or other small scale stuff. But with the introduction of the moldboard plow, we also started to run into some problems. What's this a picture of? This is the Dust Bowl. This picture comes from South Dakota. And, the cool thing is, they didn't just limit it to South Dakota. You take the Midwest and the Southwest, and we were pretty much all affected through this time. And one of the primary reasons for the Dust Bowl, there were two major things that were happening. One was environmental and one was management. The environmental issue, especially in West Texas, was we went through a dry period. The management practice that really led into it was this large-scale tillage of the land. We went from grasslands and prairies to essentially open earth. And then when the wind started blowing, all that open earth started moving around the country, which fortunately, we've completely resolved that issue. So we no longer actually see soil in the air when the wind blows, but it's good that we have these ancient pictures so that we can see what it used to be like, as opposed to 2019 in Lubbock, Texas, when we had this picture taken by the local meteorologist. The funny thing about this is we had what was called a haboob back in 2011, and I was at the ASA meetings, and we had this one in 2019, and I was at some other meetings. So we've had two large-scale dust storms in Lubbock while I've supposedly been here, but I was gone both times. So, you leave and everything falls apart. On the other hand, we have conservation tillage. So the idea was, what if we move away from just making open soil everywhere and see if we can actually use the plants to hold the soil in place, as nature intended. And so over the years, we've had several types of conservation tillage that have been developed. And the goal is to decrease soil disturbance, maintain at least 30% or more of your crop residue. And sometimes you can plant directly into the residues. Excuse me. Sometimes you'll actually go through and you'll till little strips, and then you'll plant into those little strips. But Both types of planting are possible. A lot of times you'll see mulch tillage, no-till, ridge tillage, and strip tillage as methods that you can use for your reduced till systems. And we'll go briefly into each of those. Here's one picture of a strip till system. I'm going to have another one in a couple of minutes, so don't pay too close of attention. But what you can see is you've got this area in between each of your crop rows here where you have corn residue. And then you've got these spots where you planted into your, it looks like a soybean crop, where you actually just tilled those little bitty strips and then planted in on top of that. The first one I want to talk about is mulch tillage, which uses a chisel plow. It doesn't incorporate residues very much, and it doesn't turn the soil over like a moldboard plow does. The interesting thing about a moldboard plow is this. You have all this crop residue on the surface, and you turn it into the soil, and you think that, oh, all that carbon is going to really increase your carbon in the soil. But what happens is it breaks down really fast, and you actually lose organic matter effectively in the soil. With mulch tillage, because you're keeping it on the surface, you're maintaining, because the roots are in the soil, but you've got the carbon on the surface and in the soil, you're maintaining it over a longer period of time. A lot of times with mulch tillage, you'll still come in with a secondary tillage after the fact. Here's an example of mulch tillage. You ever see a chisel plow going through the field? That's an example of mulch tillage. And sometimes, you know, depending on the producer, sometimes you'll see mulch tillage used in concert with other types of primary tillage as well. So just, you know, be aware of that. Moving to no-till, you don't use primary tillage at all in this case. You use specialized planters with disc openers so that you can slice open your bed. You can move all of your biomass out of the way, all of your plants out of the way, plant into the soil, and then close it up behind it. One of the big advantages is it minimizes your soil erosion. It increases your organic matter. And a lot of times, especially early in the season, you're going to see an increase in the quantity of water in your soil. Now, after the plants get up and growing, they're going to be pulling as much water as they can, and it's less obvious. But that is something you might ask Joseph Burke on Thursday about, because that's some of the work that he did was, you know, quantity of water in the soil with different tillage regimes. It's used less in northern latitudes because it keeps the soils from warming up early in the season. It's also not used as often here in West Texas as it is in many other places. And part of that is that if you're doing cotton, following cotton, cotton makes a very poor residue cover for the following crop. And so in order to do it here, you've got to hurry and harvest your cotton, and you've got to get wheat or something else in really fast to give it a chance to establish before the weather gets too cold, so that it'll be able to grow up and be able to make a cover for the crop for the following year. Here's an example of no-till in soybeans. And what you can see here is these soybeans look like they're growing, you know, just in undisturbed soil. The only spot that has actually even been disturbed here is that little slice that was opened up to drop these seeds in. It was closed up right behind it. A lot of times with no-till equipment, it's going to be pretty heavy because you've got to be pushing hard enough to be able to open it up and put the seeds in. The strip till rig that we've used out at our farm is probably 3 times as heavy as our planter is. Ridge tillage, you see it a lot with row crops like corn and soybean. You make ridges of soil and then you plant the crop into the ridge. They warm up faster than the rest of the soil, so it's an easy way. You're putting them up on the top where the sun's able to hit them. They'll warm up quicker and you can get faster stand establishment in that case. They can be pretty useful for reducing water movement and soil loss, because the water's not just going to run in sheets across the field. It'll actually stay within those ridges. That's the same general idea that you use with a lot of your practices, like dammer dikers. Any of you familiar with dammer dikers? There's another term for them down this way, and I'm trying to remember what they are, but they're like big paddle wheels that you can actually send down in between your crop rows, and they'll put divots in the soil. And then when it rains or when you irrigate, the water's trapped in those divots and it doesn't just run down the field. All right, so here's an example of ridge tillage. You essentially just plant on the ridges, and then you do your work up on the ridges. It's actually like a minimum size version of what you get with row crops when you're, when you're laying up your beds that you're planting into. But you can do this on crops like corn and other smaller seeded crops as well. Strip till is very similar to no-till. The only big difference is that you're going to have one strip where you've done secondary tillage on, and then you're going to be planting into that strip. Here's an example of strip till. This rig on the left is either the one that we used or extremely similar to the one that we used. And what you get is something that looks like this, where you've got these strips of bare soil with larger strips of organic matter that are in between them here. Now, something, and I'm just going to throw this out because I think it's important to think critically on these. Many times when you hear people talk, you're going to hear them say, oh yeah, if you switch to no-till, your yields are going to double, or don't switch to no-till because your yields are going to be very poor and you're going to pay the price. The reality is that a well-managed cropping system is usually going to yield pretty well, regardless of whether you're doing no-till, strip till, or conventional till. Sorry about the wavy look on this. I actually pulled this table 14-3 from the textbook, took a picture of it with my phone. I threw it into Photoshop long enough to take the gray background off the back of it. But what I wanted to point out here was, in a continuous corn rotation, whether you did chisel or strip till or no-till over time, the yields were relatively similar. If you're doing it in rotation, the yields were relatively similar. And what I want to point out from this is there are situations where no-till or minimum till is going to improve your yield or is going to improve your economic yield. But you just need to be aware that it's not going to be a fix-all for everything that you do. Something else that a lot of times doesn't get brought up in this, because there are a lot of values and advantages to reduce tillage in terms of soil erosion and other advantages that you have out in the field, but there are also some potential disadvantages. The place that I did my undergraduate work, they had some field plots that at that time were the longest continuous no-till wheat plots in the United States. And the big problem that they had with them is over time, your weeds shift from the types of weeds that you run into with a tillage system to the types of weeds that you run into without a tillage system. And they had a lot of difficulty in controlling their weeds because the weeds that happen to grow in a wheat no-till system are very difficult to control with herbicides because a lot of them look a lot like wheat. They had a lot of problems with feral rye. They had a lot of problems with wild oats. And the challenge with that was wild oats are fairly closely related to wheat, and feral rye is even more closely related to wheat. And so anything that you spray on feral rye to try to kill it is going to kill the wheat as well. And so they had to get really imaginative A lot of them used wick sprayers where they would go out with a sprayer that had a wick on the back with the herbicide that would hit all the feral rye, which was taller, and kill it, but would hopefully not drip down on the wheat and kill it. So, you know, just be aware that it's not an easy, we should all be doing no-till, because that is the great and only way in which we can properly manage our crop. But it is good. It is very valuable in terms of maintaining our cover, reducing erosion. And so it has a lot of values to it as well. I just don't want to pretend that it's something that it's not. One of the ways that we calculate how much residue we have is they used to do a lot of transects where they would actually go out with a ruler or a line, and they would just count the number of times on that line that they ran into cover on it. And then they would have a calculation that gives you a percent cover based on the number of times that it hit that line. That has been adapted over time. That's still done by many research groups, but now they do image-based work. Here's an example where they were actually doing it on a large scale with a satellite, and they use that to estimate residue cover on large scale so that you're not having to go out and do a lot of this hand counted. Generally speaking, if you're planting in the spring, which in most of the United States, that's where you see most of the planting done, unless you're in like Florida or South Texas, where you have, you know, a full season that you can be growing a crop, or a full year. But usually you plow your soil in the fall after you remove your previous year's crop. And then you do your secondary tillage usually in the spring before planting. Now, I've seen it done a lot of different ways. With our cotton, we go through and we pull up all the stalks in the fall. We do our primary tillage in the fall, and then usually in about February, we'll bed it up and list it and get it ready to go for the following year. We'll spray it once or twice more, and then, you know, really from there, we knock it down right before we get ready to plant it using a rod weeder. With my brother's operation up in Michigan with potatoes, they leave the residue on all winter long. Usually they're planting in behind corn. They have a big potato farm. What they do is the day that they're planning to plant, they actually have 3 different big pieces of equipment that they're running through. The first one's job is just to shred everything that's on top and incorporate it. And then the second one beds it up. And then the third one's the planter, and they're running with it. So you see different strategies in terms of doing it, but the goal is usually to try to minimize the amount of water loss that you get through free evaporation, try to minimize the amount of soil loss that you have, and to be able to control the weeds so that when you're planting, you're going to be able to get a good crop without a lot of weeds on it. I feel like I've hit most of this slide, so I'm going to skip the rest of it. Most of your annual crops are going to be established from seed, and it's illegal for growers to save and plant seed for protected varieties, which means if you've got technology that a company has spent millions of dollars developing, such as the ability to spray a herbicide on it, or the ability to control insects through genetics, it's costs them a lot of money to do, and so they trademark and patent that. And so when you plant it, you don't actually own the seed, you own whatever comes off of the seed, and you can't just save back the seed and plant it the next year. Traditionally in Texas, if you went 25 years ago, most producers caught their own seed and would get it delended, and then they would replant the next year. But after we moved into trait development, almost no one does now. And the only ones who do are doing it on seed that doesn't have any of those traits in it. There are a lot of seed laws. Let's jump through a couple more questions on the quiz here. I think we've covered about 2 or 3 of these. So let's see if you were paying attention. Was there a question in the back? Okay. All right. The Dust Bowl was a result of tillage, excess heat, monoculture, or cover cropping. But what if I don't want to show the correct answer? Got 5 seconds. Does it show a percent? It just shows a percentage. It doesn't. Looks like we had about 53 people participate. That's probably about right. Dr. Patel and I were getting like 20 students emailing us today with a variety of reasons why they weren't going to be able to make it to class. And some of them were touching, some of them were funny, some of them, might result in, a police investigation, not because of us. All right. Ooh, hey, I feel like I just barely talked about this. During which season would farmers be most likely to drill a field soil? Oh, do I have to start it here? Is it working for everyone? Okay. Oh, I've got to show the results. Aha. Hey, I kind of like this. All right. Looks like summer and winter are losing out here. And this I would say matches pretty well with what we see. Typically speaking, tillage generally is going to occur in the fall and the spring. Drilling is when you're planting the seed. And so usually we do it in the spring in most of the United States, but tillage and planting are usually a fall and spring activity. Ooh, all right. Which of the following would likely result in the most vegetative cover? We've got strip till, moldboard plowing, disking, and chisel plow. Ooh, it looks like it's a tight race between strip till and chisel plow right now. Ooh, moldboard. People thinking outside the box here for sure. All right. If I had to rank these, I would say moldboard plowing and disking would be the very least vegetative cover, and chisel plow would probably be the next least, and strip till would be much more, and no-till would be the most. But I'm not about to put no-till as one of the answers because that's just kind of a gimme. Oh. All right, what the? I need to reset that apparently. Let me see if I can stop this one for a second. Is it still showing on your screen? I'm going to leave it on that one and see if I can kick you off. So to certify seed, every state has their own certification association, and it's regulated by the state crop improvement associations. If you go to this link, this actually takes you to the Texas Seed Trade website. And Dr. Erica Kay is actually Texas Tech's representative to the Texas Seed Trade Association. So the next time you see him in the hall, understand that he is not only a cotton expert, he's also our seed expert right now at Texas Tech. All right, calculating pure live seeding rate. Pure live seed is just telling us what we can expect to come up out of the ground based on what we purchase. So pure live seed is just 100% or 100 times your percent germination times your percent purity. So if I have 50% germination and 50% purity, my PLS would be 25%. 0.5 times 0.5 is 0.25, and 0.25 is 25%. That would be really, really bad seed, and it probably wouldn't make it past the regulations that are associated at the Texas level, or any other state level at that point. Some states are very strict on it, and they actually say, you know, if you don't reach a certain level, you can't sell it. Other states say, as long as you report accurately what it is you're selling, we're okay with it being whatever you say that it is. So first of all, what's the advantage to setting a bottom limit to your percent live seed? Okay, better seed quality. Good. So especially, you know, if you're trying to market your state as a state where you can get high quality seed, people know they can go to the store, or, you know, they can buy it from, you know, whoever, and they know they're going to get good quality seed. What's an advantage of not setting a lower limit? Probably sell more. Yeah, you could. What might be a type of crop where you don't necessarily expect to have a really high germination percentage? Well, a lot of your native plants, if you're buying a mix of native plants, they may not have a great germination percentage, and having the flexibility allows you to sell different types of plants, with the expectation that maybe you're going to have to overseed in order to get what you want, but you know, you're still going to be able to sell it, you're still going to be able to grow it, etc. So, you know, depending on the state, some states tend to lean one direction, some states tend to lean the other in terms of what they try to do on that. Some of the things to look at when you're trying to plant, you better make sure you've got enough moisture for the seed type that you're planting, or the seed's just going to sit there. I'll start out by saying that first. Planting depth is important. Would you say that big seeds should be planted deeper or shallower, or it doesn't matter compared to small seeds? How many of you say deeper? How many of you say shallower? How many of you say it doesn't matter? All right, good. We got a little bit of all three. Well, be thinking of that. If you plant too deep, the risk is your seed's going to use up all its energy before it comes out of the ground. If you plant too shallow, it can dry out. So generally speaking, and there are a lot of factors that affect your seed depth, but generally speaking, the larger the seed, the deeper you want to plant it in the soil. They've actually done work with corn. I've seen a few studies on this where in most cases, you want to be going 2 to 2.5 inches deep on your corn seed, and they've seen significant yield increases by going at the correct depth. Wheat is more like 1.5 inches, cotton's like 1 inch to 1.5 inches. Sesame is like 0.5 inch. A lot of your smaller seeded crops, you want to go shallower because they need to get up out of the ground before they run out of energy. With your larger seeded crops, you can plant deeper into the moisture, and they've got plenty of energy to make it up through the surface of the seed here. So generally speaking, the seeds that you're going to see planted deeper are going to be the larger ones with a greater seed reserve in them. Some of the things that affect it: moisture, you need to be able to absorb water, which is called imbibition. Temperature, oxygen. If you've got too much moisture, the seed doesn't get oxygen and the seed can die. And some species require light, some species require that there not be light as they're germinating. So be aware with the type of seed that you're growing that that's the case. Dormancy is the failure of seed to germinate when you have everything that I don't like the way this is. Dormancy is when the seed is not germinating, even though it's in the soil. But it can be dormant because it hasn't been in the soil long enough, or it hasn't been in the soil long enough with it being colder than a certain temperature. It could be that your seed coat has to be broken up before it'll germinate. Some seeds put chemical compounds in that have to be broken down to extend the length, because the plant does not want to get into the soil like in the fall, and then you get a really warm fall and it decides to germinate, and then it freezes and the plant dies. So usually it has some type of a dormancy mechanism to try to delay it from just early germination. Excuse me. Let me see how many more slides we have here. What time is it? Okay, we've got time. We'll make it. One of the interesting things is, if you ever see hypogeal versus epigeal germination, epigeal means that it forms a crook and it actually pushes the stem up out of the ground first, whereas hypogeal means that the leaf comes out first. Now, am I accurate in saying, Dr. Patel, all of our grasses are hypogeal germinators? Some of our dicots are also hypogeal germinators, but a lot of our dicots are epigeal germinators. Is that correct to say? Yeah, some legumes are hypogeal, but a lot of them are epigeal as well. If you plant at too great of a density, your plants are going to compete with each other too much. If you plant at too small of a density, your plants are going to be competing with weeds, and they're also not going to be able to capture all the sunlight that would allow them to maximize their growth. So you look at plant population density and yield, your crop yield tends to come up to a maximum the more seeds that you add, whereas your economic yield tends to be dropping off at the same time when you're maximizing your crop yield. So your goal generally is to plant at a density that maximizes your economic yield. There are a lot of seed treatments that you can get. Some are fungicides, some are rhizobia, which with your legumes help it get jump started in producing nitrogen, etc. You see a lot of different types of seed equipment. Usually with row crops, it's going to be drilled or it's going to be planted with a row crop planter. You will occasionally see broadcasting. Usually that's going to occur with some of your grasses where you can put them right on the surface. Here's a row crop planter. All right, let's see if we can finish out this quiz here real quick. All right. So let's try a couple of pure live seed calculations. So germination times purity. Most of you said it's going to be 98% times 80% equals 78.4%. A few of you said 98% times 80% equals 784%. Just keep in mind, when you're doing percentages, don't forget to keep in mind that 98% is less than 1 and 80% is less than 1. So when you multiply them together, you better be getting a percentage that's less than 100%. 98% was one of the two factors that goes in, 80% was the other, but you multiply them together and you get about 78%. I think we do have at least one calculation like this on the quiz, so make sure that you try it out. Oh, here's one. Same thing, but now we've got 10% inert matter, like talc, or sometimes you'll put other things in the bag just to help with the planting. So do we do it times 10%? Do we do it times 90%? Do we just leave it alone? I will let you choose, but only one of these answers is correct. So good luck. Uh-oh, this is a bad sign. Well, it's reasonable. It's reasonable. I would say this is the answer that you would get if you're like, if only 10% is inert, 90% is seed. So let's go with this one. So not a bad critical thinking answer, but it's a trick question. It's actually this first one. Because with the inert matter, that's not calculated into our percent live seed. How many of you feel like you've been taken advantage of on that question? But now you'll know. All right, I think that's the last of those. Sometimes, depending on your planting date, that can affect your plant population strategy as well. All right, thank you, everyone. Make sure you're on time on Thursday for Joseph Burke's presentation. Come with lots of questions about this type of stuff because he is an expert on this type of stuff. And we will see you on Thursday here. Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Especially with y'all give us 2 times to take it. I've got hundreds of this. I don't want to zero.
Yeah.